I remember, Joel, I was flipping hamburgers. I was 16 years old, and I was driving home from the Hardee's Hamburger Restaurant in West Babylon on Route 109, and I was driving past WBAB, the old station on Route 109 and Sunrise Highway, and I turned the station on. I was listening to you do an interview with Tommy James of Tommy James and the Shondells fame, and it was a show on UFOs, and I became infatuated with listening to that show and with the paranormal. Yeah. And your career certainly did parallel the paranormal a great deal. You had great psychics on your show over the years, such as Bob Petro.
I should go down there just for a vacation anyway. But listen, yeah, of course, I'll come back anytime you say.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel. And before you go, for all those Long Islanders listening, who are all listeners of yours over the years, I wonder, before you go, would you do one last time for us, saying, good evening, it is midnight on Long Island.
Oh, yeah. Midnight on Long Island, thereabouts. WGN Babylon, the place I'm Joel Martin. We'll be together for the next 2 hours tonight to talk about UFOs, psychics, mediums, and whatever.
Well, that piece of audio, I've got goosebumps just listening to it, that interview was done back in August of 2013, 13 years ago, with my teacher and mentor, Joel Martin, from Long Island, who taught me really everything that I know about this business. And I started listening to Joel as a teenager, and then got the opportunity to work with him, and then at one point created not one but two television shows, cable television shows for him. But that, my friends, is how I became interested in the topic of UFOs. I listened to Joel in an interview that he did with Tommy James and of the Shondells, and talking about UFOs, and I became infatuated, and I was really, I guess, immersed in parapsychological topics, especially UFOs, working with Joel for many, many years, and being his engineer and so forth. But the fact is, I want to welcome in, I understand, someone who is a former Long Islander. Her name is Maria Cuccia. She's the author of the book, His Name is Elijah. Maria's story first reached national audiences through her appearance on the NBC television series The Other Side with Dr. Will Miller in 1997, where she shared her remarkable experiences for the first time. Since then, she has continued the conversation with interviews on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, which airs on one of our flagship stations, 92.7 every night, WABC Radio with TJ McCormick, and Redacted with former Fox host Clayton Morris. I want to welcome you, Maria, to the program, and I saw that the foreword of your book was written by Harry Hepcat. I remember Harry hanging out at the WGMD studios when he was doing 50s rock and roll shows, and Joel Martin loved having him on the program. He absolutely loved Harry Hepcat. How did you get to meet Harry Hepcat?
First off, I'm in a state of shock because you just brought me back in time. I had no idea that you would play that clip with Joel Martin. At one point, we actually wanted to write a book together. So, yeah, you just brought me back in time big time. So Harry I met because, first off, I was a musician back then, and really became more of a musician after my experience, which we'll get into. But because of the music and because of my exploration of what the heck is going on Long Island, because I had an experience and it caused me to do some research, and I discovered I was not alone. So there was an organization. It started out as LUFON, the Long Island.
I remember them.
You remember that?
I used to produce Jeffrey Wan's program before I moved down here. And we used to have MUFON representatives on, and Dick Rule, who was an UFO investigator on Long Island for an organization called APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Yeah, and then MUFON, he was on our show a number of times. You probably know Dick Rule.
I don't know Dick Rule, but I'm sure you know John Ford. Everybody knows. I
never met John. But go ahead. Okay. Your story is interesting because it's one that I've read about these kinds of stories for years and years and years, and at some point the government is trying to kind of easily tell us that there's something to this UFO phenomena that we've been hearing about for years, but there's more to it than that, and you are evidence that there's more to it than that, Maria.
Yes, thank you. So back in 1992, I was really just living an ordinary life. I was not into UFOs, knew nothing about them. I had 3 young children, was married, lived in a house, a beautiful house on Long Island. And as I said, it was an ordinary night, put the children to bed, went to sleep with my husband, and then somewhere around between 3 and 3:30 a.m., I woke up and noticed a beaming white light, like just piercing through the ceiling, which baffled me. So I rolled over on my back, and I just remember looking up at this bright white light, and the next thing I know, I felt electricity racing through my body, and bam, I was just elevated at a rapid, fast rate of speed. And the next thing I remember, and this was all conscious, this was not a dream, this was nothing subconscious, it was conscious. I found myself on what appeared to be a spacecraft, and there were 3 beings next to me. I do not recall their faces. I do recall robes, long hooded robes. And then they just started communicating telepathically with me, and they were guiding me. They were pointing to look out this large glass window. I look out the window and I see a group of children, and one child was brought forth. And the minute our eyes locked, because that's the main thing I remember, is these large, dark eyes, I felt love. It's an energy. It's just this tremendous, overwhelming energy that I felt in that moment. And for some reason, I turned and I said, "Is this my son?" I just felt it. And the answer was, "This is your son." And I said, "What is his name?" And the answer was, "His name is Elijah." So there was some dialogue, again, telepathically, as I'm staring at the boy. All he did was slowly wave his hand just to acknowledge, because we were divided by this glass window. But there were a few messages. One was about music, which I didn't understand at the time. And the most important message was, when we return you must look up the meaning of the name Elijah. And basically,
biblically,
I didn't know at first. Right. I really did not know anything biblically at the time. It was just a name, and it was connected to this boy. So then the next thing is that electricity. Then I'm going downward, and then I shot up in bed. Like, what the heck just happened?
There have been. Listen, your story is not unusual, Maria.
Right.
There have been a number of women who have reported the same story, and that story has been brought forth sometimes via hypnosis.
Right.
You remember that without having to go through hypnosis,
exactly.
Right?
No.
But some of these women report being told that this race cannot reproduce, and they are using American women to keep their species alive. Was there any telepathic communication to you when you were on board that spacecraft? Because that's really how women reported that their eggs were being taken and then harvested, and these aliens were using female human eggs to keep to rebuild their species, which had become unable to continue to replenish itself. What are your thoughts?
So for me, yes, that's a theory that's well known now. At the time,
Right.
Again, if we go back in time, the only thing I could recall was that approximately 8 years prior, I was pregnant. I was 3 months pregnant. Went to the
Really?
doctor, had the ultrasound, saw the fetus. Like every woman
Right.
who's pregnant knows that feeling the first time you see that fetus. Right. And I heard the heartbeat. The doctor commented. It was beautiful. Went home, and then next day, I suddenly collapsed. All of a sudden, I just collapsed to the floor. And it was so bad, my husband had to call an ambulance, rushed me to the hospital. Long story short, the doctor said, your body just expelled the fetal sac. And you had a miscarriage. So here the sac, actually, I expelled it. My body expelled it. A few hours later, I was discharged, went home. Everything was fine. The doctor said, you'll be fine. You're perfectly healthy. You'll be able to get pregnant again. The next day, I was called to get back to radiology. And I was being examined not only by my doctor, his assistant, and they were searching for the fetus. I said, what are you talking about? What's going on? They said
something about this whole experience didn't seem right to you.
Of course, it makes you wonder. And again, I knew nothing at the time about these theories. Nothing. I knew nothing about hybridization. I knew nothing. But that's what led me on a search. And that's like people like Joel Martin came into my life. And then MUFON. Harry was a member of MUFON, but he used to be involved with APRO. And that began my journey.
We're being visited today by panelist Maria Cuccia, author of the book, His Name is Elijah. And obviously, my friends, the United States government is trying to slowly bring us to the understanding that there is something to the UFO phenomena that is not from our galaxy. They are slowly bringing this to us. What comes, obviously, are different stories of abductions. There have been abduction stories going on for years. The first one I remember reading about was in the early 1960s, and I'm trying to Betty and
Barney Hill.
Betty and Barney, right?
Yeah.
That was the first one I remember reading about. But this book, His Name is Elijah, the experience that Maria has had, and again, these reports of abductions, alien abductions, and experiments on women. Maria, I'm not sure, what your religious background is. I'm Roman Catholic, but there are people who say, "Well, I can't believe in UFOs because it conflicts with my belief in God and the afterlife and so forth." Have you been confronted with that question, and how do you respond?
Oh my goodness. For me, it just makes sense of everything on a religious level. It makes sense because, being a Roman Catholic, we're actually just taught, the way they want to present the narrative, okay? But if we look at the Immaculate Conception, and now there's women, thousands of women who suddenly are pregnant and then they're not, without having any
explanation, right?
With the man.
Any real medical explanation for it, right?
That alone, the appearance of angels, for me, these are names. We're now calling these entities aliens.
Right.
Because they're not human, because they could appear and disappear in a split second. So we call them aliens. Now there's many different descriptions. Okay, and so the Bible talks about angels, and there's so many levels.
Absolutely. And that Tommy James segment that I talked about listening when I was 16 at the time, or I was 16 or 17. Tommy James claimed that the Star of Bethlehem, if you look at clearly how it was described, sounds like a UFO. And that was what Joel and I talked about that show for years and years and years. But this is a very interesting, I can't wait to read through your book, and I've been through so many UFO stories, but yours, you bring the human element to the alien abduction story. And there's a name attached to an alien, I get that is your son, and his name is Elijah, and that's what the book is about, right?
Yeah, and it's really about events on Long Island as well. There was a lot of paranormal activity prior to the actual experience. So,
sure.
And again, being Catholic, you think haunted house, spirits, entities. That's what was in my mind. Something's going on that level. I spoke to priests, prior to
what was your parish?
It was, well, as a child, it was Holy Name of Jesus. but then I lived in Syosset, where it was St. Edward's.
Yeah, St. Edward's, right? Yes.
Okay.
Priests, I don't know if they're very helpful in trying to help with these things. Maybe they can give you some inner peace, but I'm not sure a priest could be very helpful with this, Maria.
For me, it wasn't. What helped me was my own internal prayer meditation, my own faith that something's happening. You know, my favorite parable in the Bible is the book of Job, that came through a meditation.
Yeah, talk about faith. Talk about faith. That's what Job had, right? He had faith.
And that's the point. This experience enhanced my faith the way it should be enhanced.
My friends, the book is His Name is Elijah, the author, Maria Cuccia. The link to purchase the book is on my show notes at realnewstalk.com. Maria, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Perhaps we can have you on the show again.
Thank you for having me.
You never know when you're going to find these old Long Islanders.
I'm still blown away by by your opening segment. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on with us, and the best of luck with the book.
Thank you.
All right. You're listening to Your News Talk America. Salute the troops coming up in just a